She had no family, no allies, only the whispering wind across the riverbank and the fading warmth of her grandmother's quilt. Yet when Emily Hart heard the desperate cry of a wounded child amid the icy rapids, she shed every ounce of fear and waded into the storming current. Little did she know that her single act of compassion would draw 30 painted warriors to her doorstep at dawn, their horses' thunderous hooves announcing a new chapter born of courage and gratitude. Emily Hart pushed the door closed against the rising wind, its plaintive howl trailing through the cracks in the rough-hewn planks. Inside the cabin felt impossibly vast, every shadow stretching toward her like a silent sentinel. She shook a lock of copper hair from her eyes and wrapped her small arms tighter around her threadbare shawl. The last embers in the hearth guttered before surrendering to darkness, and Emily knew she had to feed the coals if she wanted any warmth tonight. She knelt beside the iron pot hanging above the dying flame and ladled out the last spoonful of broth. The wooden bowl trembled in her hands, and she closed her eyes for a moment, remembering her grandmother's gentle smile as she guided Emily's hand to the ladle. A little courage warms the spirit, her grandmother used to say, and Emily whispered the words to herself now, as if the night could hear and strengthen her. Footsteps of her own making shivered across the dirt floor as she carried the bowl to the battered rocking chair. It was an odd throne for an 8-year-old, but Emily had claimed it after grandmother's passing, convinced that it held some of her warmth in its grooves. She rocked slowly, listening to the creak of aged wood sipping the broth and letting its heat blossom through her chest. The wind tapped lightly at the window, as though impatient for her to do something more interesting than sit in the dark. She imagined grandmother across from her knitting by candlelight, the soft glow illuminating the lines of worry, that ever-present furrow above Emily's brow. "Be brave, child," she would say. "Bravery isn't the absence of fear, but the moment you move forward anyway." Emily sighed, setting the bowl aside. The loneliness was a constant companion, heavier some nights than others, pressing down on her like the river's current must press on fallen logs buried just beneath the surface. A sudden creak in the doorway made her start. She froze, breath-hitching. The floorboards groaned again, a subtle, deliberate groan, as if someone very light had just stepped inside. Emily's heart raced, but she did not call out. There was no one else in the cabin except her and the echoes of memories too precious to vanish completely. Yet the sensation of being watched prickled her skin, and she slid from the chair, bare feet cold against the floor. "Who's there?" she called into the dim interior, her voice shaking more than she liked to admit. The wind answered with a low moan, and the cabin remained still. Emily swallowed the lump in her throat, brushing her hair from her face. "I know you're not real," she whispered to the shadows. "Grandma wouldn't let anything hurt me." Despite her words, Emily's small lantern trembled in her hand as she carried it toward the window. Outside, the river gleamed like a ribbon of silver beneath the moon's gaze, the water churning with unseen force. She watched it for a long moment, mesmerized and terrified in equal measure. The rapids were closer than usual, as if the current sensed her presence and surged with excitement. Her breath fogged the glass as she pressed her forehead against it. Across the water lay only wilderness, untamed trees, distant high cliffs, and the constant hypnotic dance of the moonlight on the rapids. No settlement, no farms, no other souls, just Emily and the ceaseless river that carried her only memories of home. A soft whimper drifted to her ears, half drowned by the wind. Emily blinked, turning her head. It came again, a faint, frightened sound like a child's sob. Her veins iced over. That was impossible. No one dared brave these woods after sundown. Yet Emily had always believed that the world was wider than her fear, and she gripped the lantern stand like a lifeline. She debated for only a heartbeat, then marched to the door. In the cold air beyond, she felt the river's thunder before seeing it. The whimper grew louder, edged with panic. Emily shivered, but waded into the night. Each step crudely firmed in mud and leaf litter as she followed the sound. The lantern's glow barely pierced the mist rising from the water, but where it did, Emily spied a small shape tangled between rocks. A little girl, dark hair plastered to her forehead, her leg bent in a way that made Emily's own heart ache. "Oh, Emily," whispered, dropping to her knees beside the stranger. The girl's eyelids fluttered, and she tried to cry out but only gasped. Emily's eyes filled with pity and resolve. She set aside the lantern and reached for the girl's shoulder. "I'm here," she said softly. "I'll help you." The current tugged at Emily's dress, threatening to yank her into the icy churn. Fear hammered against her ribs, but she imagined grandmother's voice steadier than any lullaby. With every ounce of courage she could muster, Emily fought the river's pull, inching her way closer to the injured child. She murmured comfort, though the girl could not understand her words. It didn't matter. Kindness spoke a language of its own. Emily guided the girl's weight, careful not to worsen the injury. Step by trembling step, they crawled to the far bank. When the moonlight finally revealed the jagged stones beneath their hands, Emily bit her lip and pressed forward. The girl clutched Emily's arm, eyes wide with pain and trust. At last they staggered onto solid ground. Emily sank to her knees and reached for her cloak, wrapping it around them both. The girl's heavy breath sounded like distant storms, but Emily offered what comfort she could, stroking her damp hair and whispering, "It's okay now." Together they began the slow crawl back toward the cabin, Emily leading, the stranger following with fractured strength. Branches snagged at Emily's sleeves, and the river's roar grew distant behind them, replaced by the pounding of Emily's heart. All doubts and fears melted away. In this moment, nothing existed except the desperate act of saving a life. The cabin's lantern was a beacon of hope in the wilderness as Emily pressed the girl's hand to her chest, willing her forward. Even if it was the last thing she ever did, Emily knew she would not leave this child to the dark river. She would stand guard against any storm face, any terror, and honor her grandmother's memory by being brave in the truest sense of the word until the threat had passed at her doorstep. Emily's heart jolted as the lantern's glow swung wildly across the cabin wall, sending flickering shadows cascading over the rough planks. She had just stacked the last of her firewood when a thin, urgent cry drifted down from the bank, a voice barely above the wind but laced with unmistakable terror. Dropping the hatchet she'd used to split kindling, Emily raced to the door. The wind tore at her shawl, and she hesitated only for a heartbeat before flinging it open. Moonlight poured in pale and restless, illuminating the river's roiling surface. Somewhere out there was a child in need, alone like Emily had been until only moments ago. She gripped the doorframe, leaning forward to peer into the mist. The rapids churned like liquid glass, reflecting every star in the sky. The cry came again, more desperate, a broken plea that twisted Emily's stomach into icy knots. She scanned the shoreline, eyes straining. Then she saw her, a small figure struggling against the current, one leg bent at a cruel angle, dark hair plastered to her face in wet strands. Fear washed over Emily, not for herself, but for the girl in peril. The stories her grandmother used to whisper echoed in her mind, warnings about wild waters, tales of children swept away. Yet Emily had no home to return to, no hearth to protect, and no family to obey. All she had was the choice between standing by or wading in to help. "What are you doing out there?" Emily called into the night voice, trembling but firm. The stranger's head lolled as she tried to answer, eyes wide with shock. The moonlight glinted off the girl's face, streaked with tears and river water. Emily snatched up her lantern and stepped off the porch boots, sinking into damp soil. Each footstep left a dark footprint as she crept closer to the river's edge. Her breath billowed in the cold air, but she paid it no heed. She could feel her grandmother's gentle voice urging her on. Bravery is born in the moments you refuse to look away. The current was louder now, a thunderous roar that seemed to mock Emily's small frame. She tightened her grip on the lantern and waded in. The water lapped at her knees first, then her thighs, as though testing her courage. Stone slabs lurked unseen beneath the surface, slick with moss, waiting to send her sprawling. "Hold on," Emily called, straining to hear over the roar. Her teeth chattered as she stepped deeper, and the lantern bobbed dangerously. The girl's calls had fallen to pained sobs every second, a battle for breath and balance. Emily swallowed the knot in her throat and pressed forward, picking her footing inch by trembling inch. When she was close enough to see the girl's face clearly, Emily felt a surge of raw compassion. The girl's leg twisted at an impossible angle, and fresh cuts marked her arms where she'd clawed her way through brush before falling into the rapids. Emily reached out, voice steadying as her fingers closed around the stranger's wrist. The girl recoiled, water spilling over Emily's boots as she fought to pull away. "It's okay. I'm here," Emily whispered fiercely, kneeling in the current. "I won't let you go under." Her lantern flared, revealing the girl's terrified eyes glinting with pain and confusion. With gentle persistence, Emily slid an arm beneath the girl's uninjured shoulder. "Lean on me," she urged, shifting her weight carefully. Each step was agony. The current yanked at their joined bodies like an angry tether. Emily clamped her jaw muscles, trembling as she braced against the river's might. On the far bank, coarse reeds tore at Emily's dress, but she refused to falter. A jagged rock snagged her sleeve, and she cursed under her breath, redoubling her effort. Inch by inch they advanced, Emily's every sense focused on protecting the stranger's broken leg from the stones below. Finally, toes touched mud. Emily breathed a ragged sigh of relief and guided the girl to firmer ground. The lantern beam caught the river's glittering edge where water splashed and hissed, as though surprised to be denied another victim. Emily knelt and gently lowered the girl onto the bank, wrapping her damp shawl tight around them both. The stranger shivered violently, lips blue, but she managed a small, grateful nod. Emily brushed wet hair from her forehead and studied those dark, frightened eyes. "Are you hurt?" she asked softly. The girl's gaze flickered toward Emily before dropping to the torn sleeve that had caught on the reeds. She opened her mouth to speak native words that Emily couldn't understand, but her tone was urgent pleading. Emily laid a finger across her own lips, offering a calm smile. "I'll help you," she promised in English. The stranger's shoulders sagged in relief, and she reached out, clutching Emily's hand with surprising strength. Their fingers intertwined, two children bound by fear and hope, as the lantern's glow danced across the water and the world beyond fell silent in awe. Emily squared her shoulders against the cold that bit through her thin dress, the river's edge foaming at her ankles like a taunt. Every instinct screamed for her to step back to stay safe on the bank, but she forced her feet forward, wading into the icy swirl. The water rose to her knees, then her waist, each step a negotiation with jagged river stones hidden beneath the frothing surface. She swallowed the lump in her throat and reminded herself of grandmother's words. "Courage is when you move forward even when you're scared." Above her, the wind rippled the treetops and rattled against the cabin's roof behind her. Below, the current tugged at her skirts, threatening to drag her downstream. Emily kept her eyes locked on the faint shape across the rapids, the small figure she had glimpsed trapped on the opposite bank. Her heart pounded. Her breath came in quick, cold bursts that steamed in the moonlight. But she continued one foot, then the next, each planted with deliberate care on slippery stones slick with moss. A wave of panic roared in her ears when the water surged up toward her chin, but Emily didn't flinch. She pressed a hand to the riverbed for balance, lantern swinging from her other arm, its light dancing across the undulating currents. "It's just water," she told herself, voice taut. "And I'm not alone." She pictured grandmother's quilt folded in the cabin, the memory of its warmth lending her limbs a steady resolve. Halfway across, the river's pulse became a wild drumbeat that echoed in her bones. Whitecaps rolled around her thighs, spraying her face with shards of cold. At one point, a massive stone bigger than her head loomed in her path, forcing her to reach out and brace against its unforgiving surface. Fingertips numbed instantly, but Emily's grip held firm. She dragged her other foot forward, testing for solid ground until she found it, then pushed onward. Midstream, she stumbled. The current yanked at her balance, and for a breathless second, Emily was sure she would be swept away. She flailed lantern, slipping close to the waterline, its glow flickering perilously. Panic seized her vision, tunneling until she felt a strong hand, her own, clutching a submerged root. Gasping, she hauled herself upright again, chest heaving, and forced her legs to continue each step a battle won. Across the torrent, the girl stirred, her sobs muffled by the river's roar. Emily's throat ached with the effort of calling out, but the wind stole her words. So instead, she redoubled her pace, two aching strides carrying her closer through the whirling eddies and hidden pitfalls. When she was nearly within arm's reach, the full weight of what she was attempting crashed over her. The river could kill her as surely as it could kill the stranger she'd come to save. And yet she did not hesitate. Reaching the final diagonal bank, Emily plunged her free hand into the water and seized the girl's wrist. The girl's eyes, wide with shock, met Emily's. In that glance, Emily saw equal measures of fear and relief, gratitude and curiosity. There was no time for words. The river's power was too great. Emily braced her shoulder against the bank's rocky incline and pulled with everything she had, straining to win their small battle against nature. Together they slipped over the last ledge of stone and tumbled onto the shallow bank. Emily rolled immediately to her knees, pressing her back into the riverbank and hauling the girl further up onto dry land. Mud and grit coated both their legs as they collapsed side by side. The river roared past them triumphantly, its dark waters glinting like shards of glass in the lantern light. Emily dared to breathe, chest burning from exertion. She brushed hair from her face, recognizing now the girl's features smudged with tears framed by dark, wet curls. The stranger's lip quivered, and she pressed a small hand to her injured leg, wincing as the raw pain flared anew. "It's okay." Emily rasped, voice hoarse but gentle. "You're safe now." She fumbled for her shawl and wrapped it around them both, tugging the girl close. The tremble in the younger child's frame told Emily that shock had set in. She held her tighter, whispering, "I'm here. You're not alone." The girl tilted her head, eyes flickering with confusion and dawning trust. She opened her mouth to speak words tumbling out in a musical tongue that Emily did not know. Still the tone was urgent pleading. Emily shook her head, pressing a finger to her lips. "English," she ventured. The girl's brow furrowed, but she tried again, slower, more deliberate. Emily caught a single word, Nanook, then shook her head. "No." "Emily," she said, pointing to herself and then offering her hand to the girl. "Emily." The girl's eyes lit with recognition, and she placed her small palm against Emily's, nodding once. Somehow, that was enough. Emily pulled herself upright, testing her weight on the river-slick stones beneath her feet. Though the river still thundered behind them, she realized she must get the girl back to the safety of the cabin before dawn. Carefully, she scooped the child into her arms, mindful of the injured leg pressed against her hip, and took a tentative step toward the path that led home. Every muscle ached. Her teeth chattered so violently she worried they'd shatter. The lantern swung at her side, its glow small but unwavering in the darkness. Emily paused for a moment to meet the girl's gaze in those wide brown eyes. She saw a spark of hope that mirrored her own. Hope that forgiveness could be born of kindness, that two lonely children, each cast to opposite worlds, could bridge the chasm between them. Then Emily drew a ragged breath, squared her shoulders again, and began the slow, treacherous journey back through the river's final embrace. The night might have been relentless, but she knew that courage once kindled could burn brighter than any storm. As she stepped forward into the swirling current, she whispered the promise that had carried her this far: "I won't let go." Emily's cabin door groaned as she pushed it closed against the night breeze, her clothes still damp and heavy. She set Lena gently on the floorboards and lit a fresh handful of kindling in the hearth. The flames leapt to life with a crackle, sending flickers of gold dancing across the rough-hewn walls. Emily knelt beside her trembling guest, pulling a scrap of torn linen from her skirt to staunch the girl's cuts. Lena bit her lip as Emily dabbed at the blood with a gentle touch, her dark eyes wide with a mixture of fear and gratitude. Emily's own hands shook, not with reluctance, but with the weight of responsibility. "You're safe here," she murmured, voice soft as the embers. "Let me help you." Lena's gaze flicked from her own bloodied arm to Emily's earnest face. After a moment, she whispered a single word. "Lena," her accent lilting like a half-forgotten melody. Emily nodded, tilting her head. "Emily," she said, pointing to herself. "Nice to meet you, Lena." With a shaky breath, Emily scoured the cabin's little cupboard and produced a chipped enamel cup filled with water. She dipped a strip of cloth into the liquid and pressed it to Lena's forearm, worrying at the scabs that had begun to form. Lena's breath hitched, and she closed her eyes, willing the pain away. Emily worked steadily, her fingers gentle, as she cleaned away the dirt and blood until only pale skin remained gleaming in the firelight. Once the cuts were clean, Emily tore a wider strip of cloth and wrapped it tightly around Lena's arm, knotting it with care. Then she turned her attention to the girl's leg. Lena flinched when Emily lifted the makeshift splint, two broken kindling sticks tied together, but did not pull away. Emily remembered how her grandmother once taught her to reset a broken rib on a hunting trip long before she'd been too frail to walk. She inhaled, steeling herself, and pressed the splint against Lena's swollen limb. "Count to 3, Emily instructed in a low steadiness. Lena knotted fingers, pressing into the floor's rough planks. 1, 2, 3. Emily gently straightened the leg, listening for any crack louder than the snap of the firewood. Lena gasped, but did not cry out. Emily wrapped the splint with the remaining cloth binding the stick snugly against Lena's leg. When the finishing knot was secure, Lena flexed her toes, then nodded a quiet acceptance in her dark eyes. Emily leaned back, wiping sweat and a stray tear from her brow. "All done," she whispered, offering a tired smile. Lena pressed a hand to her chest, then reached for Emily's. Their fingers curled together, forging a small bridge of trust between two worlds. Emily stood and moved to the hearth, lifting the iron pot she had used for broth and bringing it to a low boil once more. She rummaged in a battered tin box for the last of the dried cornmeal and mixed it with water, stirring until the consistency was thick and porridge-like. The steam rose in lazy spirals, carrying the earthy scent of the river valley. Emily ladled the warm mixture into 2 wooden bowls and returned to Lena's side. "Eat," she urged gently, handing a steaming bowl to Lena. The girl's fingers hovered for a moment before closing around the bowl. As she lifted it to her lips, a single tear slipped down her cheek. Emily followed suit, dipping her spoon into the porridge and tasting its mild sweetness. "It's not much," she said, cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "Grandma used to sweeten it with berries, but I ate them all." Lena nodded in understanding and set the bowl aside for a moment, her gaze drifting to the hearth where the flames danced. Then she scooped another spoonful of the porridge and offered it to Emily. Emily accepted, returning the gesture, and together they shared the simple supper. Each bite eased the ache in their bellies, and the harsh edge of the night softened around them. As the bowls emptied, Emily busied herself gathering blankets. Her grandmother's quilt, threadbare but still fragrant with the memory of warmth. She spread it across the floorboards, inviting Lena to sit beside her. They leaned against the hearth's hearthstone backs, warmed by the glowing coals, and hearts warmed by the fragile comfort of companionship. A hush settled in the cabin, broken only by the crackle of embers and Lena's soft humming a lullaby in her own tongue. Emily closed her eyes, letting the strange melody seep into her bones, reminding her of the lullabies her grandmother used to sing under the lantern's glow. When Lena paused, Emily whispered, "Sing it again," and the girl obliged, voice trembling, but certain, weaving a fragile tapestry of sound that bound them closer. Lena's humming slowed, and she pressed her forehead against Emily's shoulder. Emily wrapped an arm around the girl's shoulders, smoothing the dark curls that fell in wet tendrils. "Tomorrow," Emily whispered, "I'll help you get home." Lena lifted her head, eyes shining with hope and relief, though neither could speak the promise in words they both understood. Outside, the river's roar subsided to a low murmur, as if honoring the quiet miracle unfolding within the cabin. The night felt suddenly less vast, less empty. 2 lonely souls, one orphaned by loss, one stranded by circumstance, had come together by firelight, knitting a bond born of courage and kindness. As the flames guttered low and the quilt's warmth embraced them both, Emily allowed herself to believe that perhaps this night of fear and desperation would become a memory of rescue and friendship. The wind rattled the window frame once more, but neither girl stirred. They were safe here in the fragile sanctuary they had created together against the darkness. The first pale light of dawn filtered through the smoke-stained window as Emily stirred beneath the faded quilt. The embers in the hearth had cooled to glowing coals, but she felt the warmth of last night's fire in her bones. Beside her, Lena lay on a mound of blankets, chest rising and falling with steady breaths. Emily watched the stranger's eyelids flutter, then open, revealing eyes clearer and brighter than they had been even before the fever. Lena's lips parted in a tentative smile, and she reached for Emily's hand. The girl's skin was cool to the touch, now the fever broken at last. Emily sat up and gathered fresh sticks from the pile by the door, dropping them into the hearth until flame leaped again, casting long shadows across the floor. Lena's gaze followed the dancing light fingers brushing idle patterns into the worn wood of the floorboards. Emily fetched water in her chipped enamel cup and offered it to Lena. The girl's hand shook only for a moment before she brought the cup to her lips, sipping gratefully. Emily knelt beside her, brushing damp curls from Lena's forehead. "How do you feel?" she asked softly. Lena set the cup down and pressed her palm against Emily's cheek, tracing the curve of her jaw. Then she tapped her own forehead, pointed at Emily, and tapped once more at her own chest. Emily frowned in puzzled curiosity. Lena repeated the motions forehead, chest, until Emily's eyes widened. "Emily," she said, patting her own chest and then touching Lena's. Lena nodded vigorously, beaming. They had their names. Lena shifted, and Emily noticed the small leather pouch tied at the girl's waist. It lay partly hidden beneath Lena's damp tunic. Curious, Emily reached out and loosened the drawstring, revealing a carved wooden pendant in the shape of an eagle against her palm. Lena's eyes brightened at the sight, and she carefully placed the pendant around Emily's neck before touching her own heart, and then holding Emily's hand up so that the teak medallion rested against Emily's chest. Emily pressed a finger to the eagle's outspread wings, turning it over in the firelight. "Eagle," she murmured. Lena smiled, then traced a circle above her heart, slashing down like a talon, and repeated it. Emily realized she was spelling out a name, White Eagle. The girl pointed at the pendant, then raised her chin proudly. "Chief White Eagle." Emily whispered, and Lena nodded so hard her dark curls bobbed. The realization struck Emily like a bolt. This was no ordinary lost child. She was the daughter of the tribe's leader. The weight of that truth settled in Emily's chest like a stone, but Lena gave no sign of fear, only trust and gratitude. Emily swallowed and gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "White Eagle's daughter," Emily said softly, as if honoring a promise. Lena's eyes glistened. She pointed again to Emily's heart, then to the pendant, then to the hearth, and spoke without words, suggesting a gift of warmth and safety. Emily nodded as though she understood perfectly, rising to tend the fire until it crackled with renewed life. She turned to the tin box and retrieved the remaining wild berries she'd stashed away. Lena watched curiosity alight as Emily mashed them into the last of the cornmeal porridge, brightening its flavor and color. Every movement was careful and deliberate, as if Emily were adhering to an unspoken ceremony. Lena reached out and touched the mixture, then licked a drop from her fingertip, closing her eyes in delight. They ate in companionable silence, the only sounds the crackling fire and the quiet drip of water from Emily's damp cloak. When the bowls were empty, Emily tucked the bowls aside and sat again beside Lena, who curled beneath the quilt clutching the pendant. Emily's heart ached at the sight the girl so far from home, yet somehow safer here than she might ever be back in the wilderness alone. Outside, something shifted in the underbrush, a distant rustle that might have been wind, might have been hoofbeats. Emily glanced towards the window, brow furrowing, but Lena placed a gentle hand on her forearm, shaking her head and pointing back to the hearth. Emily let her gaze drop to the dancing flames, curiosity stirring in her mind, but no alarm. She chose to trust the child's reassurance rather than fear the unknown beyond her cabin walls. Lena's fevered weakness had vanished now, replaced by a quiet strength. She sat up and began to methodically gather the blankets around her, folding and tucking them. Emily watched the girl's deliberate, almost ritualistic motions and realized that Lena was preparing a small offering, a bundle of herbs and a stone carved with an eagle, which she placed on the hearth's lintel. She tapped the bundle 3 times, then touched Emily's hand as though inviting Emily to partake in a shared ritual of respect. Emily knelt and touched the small bundle, inhaling the scent of pine and mint. It was far more precious than any treasure a white settler might prize. She offered a shy nod, honoring the gesture. Lena returned the nod and then stood swaying slightly, but with a proud lift to her chin that spoke of resilience and authority beyond her years. They moved together to the cabin's only window, pressing their hands against the cold glass. Emily pointed to the world outside the river that had nearly claimed Lena's life and the forest that watched over them both. Lena placed her palm over Emily's, nodding as though to say, "Together." Emily smiled, and the 2 girls stayed like that for a moment, hearts beating in quiet solidarity beneath the soft glow of the rising sun. Unspoken though it was, a bond had formed between them, Emily's courage and Lena's gratitude woven into a fragile alliance that transcended fear and difference. Emily stroked the pendant at her throat, feeling its carved feathers warm against her skin. She did not yet understand how far-reaching the consequences of her kindness might be, or how many eyes, friendly or hostile, would soon turn toward this lonely cabin by the river. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty: Lena was no mere stranger. She was a chief's daughter, and Emily would protect her with every fiber of her heart. Emily woke to a rhythmic thunder that pulsed through the floorboards and rattled the cabin walls. Her breath caught in her throat as she sat up, heart hammering beneath the quilt. The embers in the hearth had long since faded to ash, but the sound outside was alive with power. Hoofbeats, dozens of them, rolling across the ground like a gathering storm. She slipped from the blankets, every nerve alight with dread, and crept to the narrow window beside the door. Through the gaps in the rough planks, she saw them 30 mounted figures arrayed in perfect circle around the cabin. Their horses pawed the earth, stirring swirls of dust and fallen leaves. Each rider was painted in bold stripes and dots war paint that caught the rising sun in streaks of crimson and gold. Emily's heart tightened. 30 warriors. She counted again 36 shapes, heads held high weapons glinting at their sides. Spears, bows, tomahawks, silent sentinels bristling with promise of judgment. She felt the cabin grow smaller around her walls, closing in like the jaws of some great beast. Lena Emily whispered voice barely above a breath. She turned to the blankets where the girl lay sleeping, the carved eagle pendant still resting against Emily's chest. Guilt surged through her. She had sheltered a chief's daughter, saved her life. But at what cost the elders might see her kindness as betrayal. The soldiers had found the trail. No doubt they would seize any who'd harbored Lena. Emily knelt by the quilt and gently shook Lena's shoulder. "Wake up," she urged, but her voice trembled so fiercely she feared it would startle the girl into panic. Lena's eyelids fluttered open. At first, confusion clouded her dark eyes. Then relief dawned when she saw Emily standing guard. "Warriors," Emily whispered, pointing through the window. Lena followed her gesture, alarm rippling across her face. She pressed her hand against Emily's arm, steadying, comforting. Then Lena spoke softly in her native tongue, words urgent and low. Emily shook her head. She could not understand, but she caught the tone a plea for calm, an appeal to reason. Outside, the circle tightened. One warrior lifted a hand and pointed at the cabin door, as if demanding entry. Emily swallowed hard, trembling. She reached for the only weapon she had, her grandmother's old hunting knife, its blade dull, but its purpose clear. Lena saw the knife and placed a gentle hand over Emily's, stopping her. "No," she whispered in broken English voice, quiet but firm. "Friend." Emily paused, bewildered by the calm certainty in Lena's gaze. The girl tried again, pointing to her chest, then to Emily's. "Family." She said the single English word carrying more weight than any warrior's command. Emily's breath caught. Could this child's single word mix of tongue and spirit hold sway over 30 armed riders? She looked back to the window. The lead warrior, broad-shouldered and silent, dismounted and strode to the front of the circle, waving a hand for the others to hold position. His horse stamped the ground, flaring nostrils, sweeping the air. Emily's pulse hammered in her ears as Lena rose unsteadily to her feet. Though her leg was splinted, she stood tall, head high, war paint on her cheek from the river's rub. The warriors murmured among themselves, their voices low and troubled. Some leaned forward, curiosity etched in their stance. Others shifted their grips on spears, wary. Lena took a careful step forward and moved to Emily's side, reaching out to clench Emily's hand. Then, as if answering an unspoken summons, she placed her free hand over her heart and bowed her head respectfully toward their visitors. Emily mirrored the gesture uncertainly, heart thrumming like the war drums she'd never heard but somehow recognized. Outside, the chief's horse neighed softly, stamping its hoof. A gust of wind rifled through the camp, lifting the warrior's hair and skirts in a sudden dance. The lead rider, Chief White Eagle Emily, guessed by the medallion around Lena's neck, took 2 careful strides toward the cabin door. Emily felt the weight of every painted eye fixed on her. Then Lena called out, her voice steadier than Emily felt. "Clementine, no." "Emily," she corrected herself. "Saved." It was a simple declaration, but the effect was immediate. The chief paused, his broad shoulders relaxing as if a heavy weight had been lifted. He reached up and touched the pendant at Lena's waist, then pointed toward Emily and touched his own chest. "Spirit," he declared in broken English voice, deep and resonant. The warriors exchanged glances. A ripple of understanding passed through them, like the first hint of dawn across a dark sky. Spears lowered, horses' heads dipped. One by one, they bowed their heads in solemn assent. The thunder of hooves gave way to the soft murmur of respect. Emily sank to her knees, relief flooding through her in a rush so sudden it left her trembling. Lena pressed closer, her smile faint but triumphant. From outside came the sound of horseshoes shuffling as riders began to circle back, moving away from the threat of confrontation into the promise of peace. Emily exhaled a breath she hadn't known she'd been holding. The warriors remained a living ring around the cabin, but their swords and lances no longer seemed poised for battle. Instead, they were guardians of a new bond, one forged by courage in the heart of darkness and honored at the first light of dawn. The morning light had just begun to gild the tops of the pines when Chief White Eagle dismounted his great horse, pawing the ground as if stirred by the gravity of the moment. Emily stood beside Lena at the cabin door, heart pounding so fiercely it echoed in her ears. The warriors formed a silent ring beyond, but all eyes were fixed on the chief, towering and solemn in his painted face and feathered headdress. He moved with deliberate grace toward the threshold, each step measured weighty with purpose. Emily's grip on Lena's hand tightened. The girl leaned into her courage, shining in her dark eyes. The chief paused a few paces away, studying Emily as if seeing her for the first time. His gaze was piercing, dark as storm clouds, yet not unkind. Emily swallowed, bracing herself for what might come. Lena stepped forward, then wincing slightly on her splinted leg, and lifted her voice. Though the words were native, her tone carried clarity, urgent pleading, full of heartfelt gratitude. She wove her hands in the air, tracing the arc of her rescue, pointing toward Emily, then her own chest, then to the river that lay beyond sight. Emily watched as the chief's expression softened ever so slightly, the rigid lines around his mouth easing as he absorbed each gesture. A hush settled over the circle of warriors. Only the wind whispered through the trees, lifting stray strands of Emily's hair. On the cabin's creaking porch, Emily could feel the tension coiling in her shoulders, ready to spring. She remembered her grandmother's words. "True bravery is in the face of judgment." She swallowed hard and waited. Chief White Eagle raised a hand, stamped ground to hush the murmurings of his people, then spoke in a voice that rolled like distant thunder. "Child brave," he said in broken English, pausing so each word landed with weight. "Child heart strong." He turned his gaze back to Emily, and she felt every painted warrior's eyes upon her, weighing her, judging her. Emily exhaled slowly, nodding once in solemn acknowledgement. She stepped forward as if answering an unspoken summons and lifted her chin. "I only did what seemed right," she whispered, voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "No one should drown alone." Lena squeezed Emily's hand, then released it to extend her own toward the chief. The chief met her gesture by lifting her small palm, pressing it against his own heart, in a gesture of shared spirit. Emily watched the exchange, understanding dawning in her chest. This was more than explanation. It was an appeal to honor. An appeal that Emily's actions had transcended the fear and prejudice of their two worlds. Chief White Eagle closed his eyes for a moment, head tilted as though in prayer to the Creator. Emily held her breath. When the chief opened his eyes again, they glowed like embers beneath the war paint. He turned his head toward the warriors who stood unmoving but attentive. His voice rose in the praise song of his people, words Emily could not decipher, yet felt like thunder rolling across the valley. With each phrase, the warriors bowed their heads in unison, as though the chief's song washed away the tension that had gripped their hearts. Then the chief took 2 slow steps forward, each one deliberate, each one closing the distance between culture and conquest, and knelt on one knee before Emily. The wooden porch groaned beneath the weight of his ceremonial posture, a posture of respect offered by a leader to one he deemed worthy. Emily's pulse thundered so loud she feared he might hear it. She dipped into a tentative curtsy, head bowed, eyes wide. Chief White Eagle lifted a hand and touched the carved eagle pendant around Emily's neck, the symbol of his daughter's family now worn by Emily as a bridge between their worlds. His fingers lingered on the feather's grooves as though committing every curve to memory. Emily swallowed, warmth flooding her cheeks, but she met the chief's gaze without flinching. "Spirit of river," he intoned, mixing his native tongue with the English he had learned from traders and settlers alike. "Spirit of river lives in you." His voice was deep and resonant, vibrating through the porch boards and into Emily's bones. She felt honored, humbled an orphaned girl by fate, but here she stood honored by a chief. The chief rose, and his warriors rose with him like trees awakening to the dawn. Their circling ring tightened and then opened as if to welcome Emily into a space she had never dared imagine she might occupy. Horses shifted their weight, nostrils flaring as they sensed the change in the air. Emily watched the transformation. Faces that had been stern with suspicion were now alight with respect. Chief White Eagle stepped back and raised both arms, palms outward, turning slowly to encompass Emily, Lena, and the assembled tribe. In that moment, Emily felt as though she had been lifted above her doubts, her loneliness, her grief. She felt rooted, chosen. Selected not by birthright, but by a single selfless act that had bridged two worlds. Lena ran forward, then despite her injured leg, and flung herself into Emily's arms. Emily caught her careful of the splint and held her close. The chief watched, a solemn smile cracking his weathered face. He exchanged a glance with his warriors, who nodded once, then turned their mounts and began a respectful withdrawal, dispersing into the surrounding forest with silent dignity. Emily stood with Lena still pressed against her, both girls illuminated by the rising sun, and the chief's final nod of approval. The ring of warriors had dissolved into the mist of early morning, but their judgment had transformed into acceptance, and with it Emily felt the fragile promise of a new beginning take root in her heart, as solid and enduring as the river's ancient flow. Emily's breath caught as Chief White Eagle reached into the folds of his leather pouch and withdrew an object wrapped in buff-colored cloth. He unfolded the fabric with reverent care, and Emily's eyes widened as she glimpsed the surface of the heirloom, a medallion carved from stone, so dark it seemed almost liquid, etched with the silhouette of an eagle in mid-flight. The edges were worn smooth by generations of hands, and tiny symbols, runes of protection and kinship, traced the creature's wings. Lena pressed forward, eyes shining with pride as the chief held the medallion aloft. A hush fell over the remaining warriors, their painted faces reflecting the morning light and the gravity of the moment. Emily felt her heart hammer in her chest, each beat echoing the rhythm of the eagle's outstretched wings. She stood rooted where she was, hands trembling at her sides, unsure if she dared touch something so sacred. Chief White Eagle cleared his throat, and the morning birds held their song. He spoke in his native language, words that rolled like distant thunder, and Emily watched as Lena translated each phrase with solemn gestures and soft nods. This medallion, Lena signed, urgently belongs only to blood, only to family. She tapped her own chest, then pointed to Emily, letting the weight of the declaration sink in. Emily swallowed, vision swimming with tears. She tried to blink away. The chief did not simply present the medallion. He held it like an offering of his own spirit. The eagle's carved eyes seemed to gleam with its own inner light, as though it recognized Emily's courage and accepted her into its ancient lineage. Slowly the chief stepped forward and knelt once more, this time holding the medallion by its braided leather cord. "Daughter of spirit," he intoned in careful English voice, soft but unwavering. "Sister of Lena." His gaze met Emily's steady, open, free of judgment. "Heart of eagle," he added, pressing the pendant against Emily's chest so that its cool weight settled above her heart. Emily's knees buckled, and she forced herself to remain upright to accept the gift, not just of the stone, but of a new identity. The medallion's surface pressed gently against her skin, and she felt a sudden warmth pulse outward, as if the chief's blessing had ignited something inside her. Tears brimmed in her eyes, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming gratitude and a sense of belonging so profound it left her breathless. Lena moved to Emily's side, her splinted leg forgotten in this moment of celebration. The girl's small hand slid around Emily's waist, drawing her close, and Emily returned the embrace, careful of the heavy stone now resting between them. Around them, the warriors bowed their heads and muttered blessings in their tongue. Words Emily could not translate, but could feel in their resonance like ripples crossing a still lake. Then came the ceremony Emily had not even known she longed for. Chief White Eagle rose the medallion's cord, slipping through his weathered fingers until it hung heavy around Emily's neck, the eagle's wings beating silently against her chest. He straightened, reaching up to touch the pendant once more, and declared, "My daughter." His single word rang clear in the morning air, and the warriors answered with a murmur of acceptance that swelled to a respectful roar. Emily closed her eyes, letting the moment wash over her. The cabin behind her, once a symbol of isolation, now seemed a threshold into a world she had only just discovered, a world whose people had risked confrontation to honor her kindness. The weight of the medallion was both tangible and symbolic, a reminder that she was no longer adrift, but anchored by bonds she could neither see nor touch, yet felt more deeply than any comfort her grandmother's quilt could ever provide. Lena released Emily and took a step back, admiration shining in her gaze. Emily reached up to the cord, tracing the eagle's carved feathers with a trembling fingertip. In that simple act, she felt the chief's legacy, Lena's gratitude, and a tribe's acceptance flow into her veins like the river's steady current. She exhaled a gentle sigh that carried away months of loneliness. Chief White Eagle regarded her with a pride that softened the lines of his weathered face. He motioned to the warriors, who began to circle forward in quiet procession, each laying a gift at Emily's feet: a bundle of dried herbs for healing, a woven band of braided leather, a carved wooden pipe for peace. Emily knelt to accept each offering with grace, her fingers brushing theirs in silent thanks. As the final warrior stepped forward, young and fierce eyes bright with promise, Emily realized that each gift symbolized a different aspect of her new place among them: healing, unity, peace. She stood slowly, medallion resting against her chest, and met the young warrior's gaze. He nodded respectfully, then returned to his place in the circle. Emily felt a warmth blossom in her chest, a fire kindled by acceptance and love. She glanced at Lena, whose smile was a promise of the adventures and trials that awaited them together. Chief White Eagle stepped close and placed a paternal hand on Emily's shoulder. The touch was gentle, yet commanding, a reminder of the responsibilities that came with this sacred gift. Without a word, Emily pressed her palm over the medallion and pointed to her own heart. Chief White Eagle followed her gesture, tapping his chest in return, sealing their bond in a gesture older than any spoken vow. Around them, the warriors echoed the motion, each placing a hand over their heart in respect. The sun climbed higher, light spilling into the cabin and transforming the simple dwelling into a hall of kinship. Emily's world had shifted in that single profound moment. She was no longer the lonely orphan by the river, but a daughter of spirit sister to a chief's child and a member of a people whose traditions ran deeper than any riverbed. As the morning breeze drifted through the open door, carrying with it the promise of new beginnings, Emily allowed herself to embrace her future. The medallion's weight was a comfort, its carved eagle a constant reminder that she belonged. And for the first time in her life, she felt truly home. Emily felt the first chill of dawn in her bones as she stepped out of the cabin, the morning mist curling around her ankles like ghostly fingers. Across the clearing, the last vestiges of the river's gentle roar were swallowed by the whispering pines. But Emily's ears were tuned to a different sound, the distant clip-clop of cavalry horses. She stiffened, heart pounding. Soldiers patrolled these woods often, now scouring every creek and cabin for any sign of her and Lena. Lena stood beside her, still pale from fever, but steady on her feet. The weight of the medallion at Emily's throat seemed to pulse in time with her own heartbeat, a constant reminder of the bond she'd forged with Lena's people. In the cold light, the cabin behind them looked fragile, a lifetime of memories resting on splintered wood and tired earth. Emily glanced back once, her heart tugging at the small homestead that had sheltered her since her grandmother's passing. Yet the future she faced here, beyond these walls, stretched wider than the river valley ever had. We must go," Emily whispered, voice thick. Lena nodded, her dark eyes bright with determination. She reached for Emily's hand, squeezing it once before letting go. A gentle mare stood waiting, saddled and neighing softly, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. Emily ran her fingers through the horse's mane, feeling the warmth of its breath against her palm. She swallowed hard and climbed into the saddle, then reached down to help Lena mount behind her, careful of the splint at the girl's leg. Emily settled into the mare's withers, the leather saddle creaking. Lena tucked herself close, wrapping her arms around Emily's waist. The mare shifted, pawing at the ground, ready to move. Emily dug her heels gently into the horse's flanks. With a soft nicker, the mare loped forward onto the forest path, hooves quiet on the carpet of pine needles. As they emerged into the clearing, Emily looked back one last time. The cabin's roof was half hidden by smoke from the hearth, its walls still standing against the rising light. Overhead, the sky was flushing pink and gold, the kind of sunrise that promised hope. Emily felt tears prick her eyes, but she pressed her chin forward, focusing on the path ahead. Behind them, the war party formed an arc of painted warriors, 20 strong, now each astride a horse, as silent and watchful as sentries in a dream. Emily could feel their presence like a living wall of protection. Their scowls of steel had softened these past days into expressions of fierce loyalty. No longer did she sense judgment in their gaze, only respect and a willingness to defend her with their lives. The hoofbeats grew louder as the patrol came closer. Branches cracked under heavy boots, and the distant shouts of soldiers echoed like an approaching storm. Emily's grip on the reins tightened, but she refused to falter. She had chosen this life, a life tethered not to lonely isolation, but to a family who had chosen her in return. A rider in the front of the war party, a tall warrior with eagle feathers interlaced in his hair, raised his hand in a silent signal. The warriors closed ranks behind Emily and Lena, forming a protective horseshoe around the gentle mare. Emily glanced at Lena, who gave her a small, encouraging nod. Together they faced the world as sisters and daughters of the same spirit. Ahead, the forest path curved and narrowed. Emily guided the mare forward, the riders parting like reeds in a stream to give them safe passage. She could see now the flash of blue and gold on soldiers' uniforms moments before they passed the clearing, unaware of the true nature of the two girls riding with an armed escort of painted warriors. Emily leaned closer to Lena and whispered, "Thank you for choosing me." Lena turned her head, her smile radiant in the new light. She rested her head on Emily's shoulder, and together they listened as the forest swallowed the sounds of pursuit. In that shared quiet, Emily felt the tension in her shoulders ease just slightly, replaced by a fierce joy she had never known. They rode until the trees opened onto rolling grasslands, the valley stretching out like a lush green sea. Small wooden homes lay scattered along the riverbank beyond the trees, unaware of the silent procession that passed among them. Emily's breath caught as she realized she would never look at these lands the same way again. Not as the solitary girl who feared every rustle in the underbrush, but as part of something greater than herself. The warriors slowed the pace until they were a calm escort, each horse stepping in time, the sound a gentle heartbeat beneath them. Emily guided the mare to a standstill beside a shallow stream sparkling in the dawn. Beside her, Lena slipped from the saddle onto soft grass, her leg trembling but her spirit unbroken. Emily slid down too, landing lightly and helping Lena regain her balance. Chief White Eagle's son, young, fierce, but with a tenderness in his gaze, approached holding out a carved wooden bowl of cool, clear water. Emily dipped her hand and splashed her face, then offered the bowl to Lena, who drank deeply. Emily watched her drink, the steam of her breath mingling with the morning air. The chief's son touched the medallion at Emily's chest in respectful salute before nodding toward the east. Emily understood the unspoken advice the patrol would circle back soon, and to remain here was to risk exposure. The path ahead lay toward the heart of the tribe's hidden valley, the home that Lena had first shown her by moonlight. Emily nodded, determination blazing brighter than the rising sun. She helped Lena mount the mare once more, then swung up behind her, careful to keep her legs clear. The procession resumed with renewed purpose, riding eastward toward carved canyon walls and meandering streams that led deeper into the tribe's ancestral homelands. Emily felt the mare's warmth beneath her, Lena's steady presence before her, and the loyal warriors flanking them like living guardians. Each moment the wilderness seemed less vast, her fears less overwhelming. As they rounded a bend, Emily caught sight of the valley's first teepee tops rising above distant treetops. Plumes of smoke drifted lazily into the sky, and she could almost taste the smoke-kissed aroma of cooking fires. In that instant, Emily felt every doubt and sorrow fall away, replaced by an unquenchable hope. Here awaited a new life of shared laughter, communal rituals and stories told beneath a canopy of stars. Emily tightened her arms around Lena's waist and whispered, "I'm ready." Lena pressed her cheek to Emily's shoulder and replied in soft English, "Family." The warriors closed in their painted horses, stamping the earth in silent accord, and Emily realized that her world had reshaped itself into something more beautiful and terrifying and wondrous than any sunrise she had ever known. She lifted her gaze to the horizon where the sky blazed in promise and nudged the mare forward. Together, Emily and Lena rode into that light, no longer alone but bound by courage, kindness, and family.